Now, a lot of you probably know today's verse, but let's just break it down a little bit because Paul is writing to the church in Corinth. This is his second letter. And what Paul is writing about is how we boast in our weakness. We don't boast in our strengths. We boast in our weakness in Christ. Now, let me explain what he says here. But let's back up to 11 first, because he tells us right here in verse 30, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weaknesses. Now let's go down here. He tells us again, I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Verse 3, and I know that this man, whether in body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. Okay, so first off, who was Paul talking about? Who's Paul saying was caught up to this third heaven? Who's Paul telling the reader was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things? And what Paul's actually talking about is himself. He's talking about himself. He's talking back to the day when he was on the road to Damascus as Saul from Tarsus, the murdering, persecuting, person of Christians. And he's saying, if I must boast, I will boast about the things that show my weaknesses. And then he comes down here to this verse and saying, and look, even if I was to boast, he's saying, I'm the one that has the most to boast about. Jesus came and appointed me as an apostle. Specifically, he goes on to write 14 of the 28 or 27 books in the New Testament. So what Paul is literally telling, and the Jewish people would have understood this when they were reading this. He's saying, I knew a man who knew Christ, who was given a mission, who was told things in the heaven that were inexpressible things that no one's even permitted to tell. So he's saying if anyone should boast in Christ, it's him. Okay, but now notice specifically, he doesn't say, I was caught up. I know a man. It's humility he's showing here in this letter when he's writing to the church. He's not saying, I'm that man. He's going, I know a man. Now let's go back down here. Verse 5. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Verse 6. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth. So he's saying, listen, I'm not wrong. That's what he's saying. He's going, listen, I am the dude. I met Jesus personally and he commissioned me. And still, I won't brag about a man, but I won't brag about myself, but I would brag about a man like that. But then he goes on to say, look, even if I was to boast about myself, I wouldn't be wrong. I wouldn't be wrong because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surprisingly great revelations. So what he's saying is like, look, I could make the focus about me. I could talk about man and how great I am, but he's not going to because he knows better. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted. Because what he's saying is that he doesn't want you to think of him. He wants you to stay focused on Jesus Christ because he knows that he is absolutely nothing without Jesus. And it is only because of Jesus that he's anything. So even if there was one human being on earth of all ever, Paul is saying, I'm that dude. I'm that dude. And even when he goes to tell us that he's that dude, he doesn't even tell us that he's that dude. It's just implied contextually because at the time it was written, we know. So he goes on to say, I won't boast, but I knew a guy who has every right to boast. And if I were to boast, which I'm not going to, I would boast about a man like that, but not a man like me. And even if I was to boast about me, I would not be lying. Now, this next part's very important for you guys, okay? This is going to be hard for you to reconcile. I've been dealing with this for about the last 8 months as I continue to try to reconcile my thorn. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. So for all of you, and this is directly, I'm saying this to me, for all of you who are trying to be perfect, who are trying to show how disciplined and obedient you are, right? There's going to be something of the flesh because we live in a fallen world. We are a fallen people. We are ruled by the flesh in a realm that's ruled by Satan, right? Jesus Christ has all authority over everything, but I'm saying that's where we exist. So the only human to ever be perfect was Jesus. And in order to keep pride from setting in to us as humans, the Lord will give us a thorn in our side, a messenger of Satan to torment us. So for those of you who are trying to be perfect, who just keep backsliding to this one thing or next, I'm not telling you not to keep trying to be as holy as you possibly can. But what I'm saying is that in this realm, we are designed to have a thorn in our flesh that we can't get rid of. So we remain weak and dependent in this realm, and we can turn to Christ for all of our needs. And that's why these letters are in red, because this is what Jesus is telling Paul. 3 times I pleaded with Jesus to take it away from me. But he said to me, Jesus says to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, which is like, he's like, my grace is enough. You don't need more than my grace, because he's saying that my power, Jesus is telling him, my power is made perfect in your weakness, in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Because when we submit and surrender our flesh to Jesus Christ, we are filled with his power and glory. We are filled with the ability to do all the works that he's able to do. So Paul is saying, I won't boast about anything I've ever done, although I'm like the one human being who has every right to boast about what I have done, because I have done the most for the humans. And even still, he's saying, no, I won't, because Paul knows that even at his greatest as a human being in his flesh, it pales in comparison to the power and the love and the glory that we have in Jesus Christ. And that's what this entire passage is about, is Paul saying, yo, listen, although we could brag as humans, there's no point. Remain humble, because everything that we do is through Christ. It tells us in 1 John, let's go back to 1 John real quick. The Word became flesh. Jesus, he's talking about Jesus here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. He's talking about Jesus. In the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. Jesus was with God in the beginning. That's what he's saying here. And so we have to remember that in Jesus Christ we are made strong. It is only through him that we have anything. Through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. They're talking about Jesus. Through Jesus, all things were made. Without Jesus, nothing was made that has been made. In Jesus was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And then the best verse, I think, in the entire Bible, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.